Hello, and welcome to another Rant Rave review. You may have noticed the different background behind me. This is my true crime and mystery bookshelf. There's actually a shelf of folklore on the bottom that you can't see. But yes, this is actually the shelf I had behind me at the dawn of my channel, if you remember that many, many moons ago, when I reviewed Knives Out. And that's that's one of the reasons why I'm here, because I'm going to be reviewing Knives Out too. But actually, the real reason is because the other bookshelf that I usually sit in front of is in my bedroom, and every time I'm done filming, I have to put away all my filming stuff and get it all out, and it's really annoying. And so this is hopefully a permanent filming spot. Yeah, so I'm going to be putting some things on this wall once I get around to it, but YOLO. For now, I have my beautiful true crime shelf, my beautiful bilingual police tape, my beautiful true crime earrings, their little handcuffs. I really like mysteries and I really like true crime. And I really liked Glass Onion. And some people didn't. And some people did. And I will be raving about the movie. And I will be ranting about people who talk about the movie. Both those who love it and hate it. Because I have many, many thoughts. So, the first part of this review will be non-spoilery, because I really want people to go see that movie, and then the second half will be spoiler-tastic, a deep dive, a deep breakdown. So, why you should see Glass Onion. First, let us go back to Knives Out, which I hope you should have all seen. If you haven't, see it first. Knives Out, if you recall, was basically a homage, pastiche, deconstruction, of cozy mysteries, country house mysteries, where you have a whole big, group of people, country house, murder, whodunit, etc. And the twist was that I always talk about how it's a perfect three-act structure. The first act is your typical, here's all the characters, who are they, what's their motive. The second act, and this is the twist, we are shown exactly how the murder happened. And you're like, oh. And so the second act is like the murderer trying to not get caught. And then the third act is like the denouement, the unraveling of like, here's what actually happened. And it's just delightful. The other twist is that the detective does not know who hired him. And the reason it's one of the best, like, deconstructions of a murder mystery, traditional mystery, is because it does what most deconstructions nowadays don't do. Most deconstructions are like, we're going to rip this thing apart, and then we're going to like walk away and leave the audience completely unsatisfied. Whereas this is like, we're going to deconstruct it, we're going to look at all the parts, and then we're going to reconstruct it into a really good example of a traditional mystery. Like, that's like the proper way to do that, is like if you have a deconstruction of a superhero movie, it should be a really good example of a superhero movie. If you're going to deconstruct a fantasy, it should actually be a good example of a fantasy. Yeah, like, because otherwise you're just like, oh, we just like left the pieces on the floor, ciao, and everyone will hate you. So don't do that. Do what Knives Out did. Glass Onion. Glass Onion is a sequel in the same way that like a Miss Marple mystery or a Sherlock Holmes mystery or what have you is a sequel, where it's the same detective but a completely different cast otherwise, which is how you do traditional mysteries. Yes. So Glass Onion is interesting in that it's actually a 4-act structure, split right down the middle. So we have Act 1 is there are these 6 friends who know each other. One of them is this rich, like, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk-esque, like, young tech magnate type guy, magnate, whatever, that kind of guy. And he invites his 5 friends to this giant Greek island that he has. He gives them these, like, weird puzzle boxes that they have to solve, and they're invited. And the invitation inside is like, come solve my murder, because a murder is announced. It's a murder mystery party, where of course a real murder will happen because we wouldn't watch the movie otherwise, but yeah. But the twist is that Benoit Blanc, our adorable Southern detective from Knives Out, is also invited to the island. Well, he also receives a puzzle box. He's not invited to the island, we learn. He received a puzzle box, but this rich magnate, Miles, did not actually invite him. So it's like, what's going on? Very suspicious. And again, the first act, we meet these friends. We realize there's like tension between them. Who's who, what's what, and what are all their motives. Okay, Act 2 is the actual murder mystery dinner party, where of course, because it's a murder mystery, a real murder occurs, because you gotta. Like, this is the way of things. Okay, and then there's a hard split halfway through the movie. And then Act 3 like recontextualizes everything we've seen up to this point. It's so interesting and fun. Recontextualizes everything that you thought you knew. And then Act 4 is like, okay, starting with, I won't tell you what part because it's a spoiler, of course, but basically at the end of that, recontextualization, it's like, okay, here's the actual denouement, here's what actually happened, and then like, and I will say this movie's not as good as Knives Out. It's a little shark jumpy in the final act, a little over the top, if you will, but I'm willing to like look over that. Again, given my experience with like Agatha Christie, like there's certain stories of hers where there's like coups and princes and secret agents and all this crazy nonsense. So I'm like, I'm willing to give a little bit of like leeway to an over-the-top mystery. Also, and this will soon lead into the people who hated it for no reason, it's a mystery and it's a comedy, okay? And those two genres are like the two most artificial genres in horror. Horror, mystery, and comedy. There we go. Like, it's more about the audience reaction than it is to, like for example, like fantasy and sci-fi, you have to have really, like, not even realistic per se, but like it has to be really tight. It's about the world, and the world has to make sense. Whereas horror, mystery, and comedy, it's more about like, are you successfully making the audience afraid, or making the audience laugh, or making the audience like try to solve the mystery and then be like, aha, at the end. Like, yeah. So I'm willing to give a lot of leeway for like artificiality, shark jumping, comedy, etc. So yeah. Okay, so that out of the way. Glass Onion is great. It is very funny. And yeah, it's just a nice, like, well-constructed little mystery. It's delightful, and I've watched it, I actually watched it 3 times. I saw it, like, the day it came out. I saw it a week later with my friend, and then, once it came out on Netflix. So those were in theaters, and then I saw it on Netflix again. So, like, it's worth a rewatch. It's just good. Okay. So, that is the end of the spoiler-free review. Go see it. It's great. Now it's time for the spoilers and the rage and the rant. So that was my rave. Hooray! This is my rant. Okay, so people on the internet are very, very, let's not be insulting. Okay, I won't, I much like many of my reviews, I already filmed this once and I was just like seething with acid, but let's just not be that. Yeah, okay. People have incorrect opinions. Okay. There's 2 camps, and they both bother me. There are conservatives, mostly on YouTube, who are clearly unacquainted with like cozy or traditional mysteries, and also didn't pay attention very much to the movie, and they hate it. And then there's the other camp, which is liberals, mostly on Tumblr, who are clearly unacquainted with cozy mysteries and were just tickled pink by the most like obvious banal things in the entire world. And they both bother me. So let's talk about that. Let's break it open. Okay. First, I'm going to address those who hated it and why they're wrong, and then I'm going to address those who like it for the wrong reasons and why they're wrong. Yeah. I really care about mysteries, okay, and crime. I don't know if you could tell, but yeah. Okay. So, people who hated it, like, one of the main things people, like, complain are like, it's contrived, which, again, I'm like, it's a traditional mystery. Like, if you don't like contrived things, please don't watch a traditional mystery. Like, hello? Like, somebody, okay, again, spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, leave now. But one of the things people were saying was contrived was like, oh, like, Andy, like, happened to have been murdered right before this, like, mystery weekend. And I'm like, yeah, that's, like, the premise of the movie? Like, why would you, like, yeah, that is contrived. Who cares? Who cares? Like, there's an Agatha Christie, ton of them are contrived. But there's an Agatha Christie movie book I just read called Cat Among the Pigeons, where like there's this prince of some Middle Eastern country, and there's a coup, and he's trying to get jewels out of the country, and he gives them to his friend who happens to have a sister who goes to this rich boarding school, and at the boarding school there happens to be like the fiance maybe of the like prince who went to the thing, and one of the teachers happened to have been in the Middle Eastern country and saw the guy hiding the jewels, and they happen to happen, and it's like, yeah, that's completely unrealistic and never gonna likely to happen, but who cares? Like, the point of a mystery is you set up all these characters in an extremely artificial way, and you have a fun and interesting mystery. Like, I talked about this book too, 7.5 Deaths. The entire thing is like the most contrived thing in the entire world, and it's beautiful. A mystery is like a board game. A mystery is like a board game where we all agree to these completely artificial rules and setup because we want the fun of the game, which is trying to solve the mystery. Another example is how, like, there's an unspoken rule that you have to introduce the killer before the halfway mark in the movie, or book, or story, and, like, of course that's not realistic. Like, there's tons of, like, true crime stories where, like, you know, you'll go, like, 8 years with a cold case, and then finally you'll find a suspect who no one knew existed. Like, cool. Like, yeah, like, if you don't care about, like, the artificiality, watch true crime. But if you're fine with artificiality, read mysteries. And if you aren't fine with artificiality, please don't watch or review or talk about mysteries, because, like, you're clearly not into that kind of genre. Yeah. Sorry, like, it just bothers me so much. I'm just like, okay, other things. Okay. So, yeah, but then there's things that aren't actually flaws, where, again, you just have to, like, watch the movie or think about it. Like, somebody was saying that they, like, oh, well, if Miles is supposed to be such an idiot, why did he still send a puzzle box to Andy? And I'm like, A, I assume he just told his puzzle guy to send it to these 5 friends, like, 5 months before, you know, he probably didn't even send it to them personally, but B, it was in the mail, obviously, because he killed Andy the day before the puzzle boxes arrived, I assume, or, like, right before the puzzle boxes arrived, so, like, it was probably in the mail, because, like, Helen's cleaning out the house, and then Helen gets the puzzle box delivered, so the puzzle box was in transit during the murder. Okay, not a problem, not a flaw. I have so many thoughts. Another thing is, like, people were saying that it's a flaw, like, well, if Miles is so stupid, why did he, like, suddenly think to burn the napkin? And I'm like, he didn't. He literally didn't. If you watch the movie, Miles didn't burn the napkin because he's an idiot. And Lionel, like Helen has a napkin, and Lionel's like, why didn't you just burn it? And then he's like, and then he burns it, and then he, like, finger guns at, like, Miles to be like, not Miles, Lionel. Lionel says, why didn't you burn it? Miles burns it, and then finger guns to Lionel, like, thanks. Like, he literally is, like, underlined, literally, this guy's modus operandi, is he just steals ideas from people. Like, that's literally, like, hello? Like, people are like, that's a flaw, and I'm like, it's not a flaw. Like, he literally did that. Now, things that are flaws, because I you know, it's not a perfect film. There are flaws. My brother was saying how, like, there actually are things that Miles does that are smart, which is true. For example, I submit that the, like, pineapple juice allergy poison is actually really smart and clever to do all of a sudden. So yeah, it is an objective flaw that the movie presents that as stupid. Okay, fine. It may or may not be an objective flaw of Miles having to point out the glass that had the pineapple juice as being his. Although I'm still not convinced that he didn't, like, I assume he just took both glasses and filled one with pineapple juice and gave it to David Bautista, and, like, I don't even know if he knew it was his glass until he literally saw it. It was like, oh, me, which is still clever. That's the thing. It's like, it's not a flaw. It's a flaw in the movies trying to get us to think he's always an idiot. It's not a flaw in his character. Yeah, I don't know how I'm trying to say this. I'm saying he does do some things that are clever sometimes. He is not as complete an idiot as the movie would want us to think he is, which is an objective flaw. Fine. But the overarching, like, he's an idiot, like, I can see why people might not like that, but it is not a flaw in and of itself. And again, it's set up from the beginning, like, the whole reason that Blanc can't see, like, what's right in front of him is because Blanc is not good at, like, basic, like, if it's too simple, he basically, like, gets, like, tunnel vision and won't see it, which is set up by the fact that he's bad at Clue, which is set up by the fact that he's bad at Among Us. As somebody pointed out, like, there aren't even any other dead, like, characters, which means he probably, like, piped through and, like, just exposed himself. Like, he's that bad at simple things. And so, like, and again, it sets it up when Helen's like, well, couldn't Miles have, like, killed Andy? And Blanc's like, well, he's too clever for that. Because he's not seeing, like, the obvious stupid thing. Which, again, I can see somebody not liking that as the twist, but it is not an actual flaw. Like, it is okay to have the murderer be, like, so stupid that you wouldn't think that they are that, especially because everyone assumes that he's smart because that's how he presents himself. Like, it's not just like, oh, he's an idiot. It's like, he's an idiot who's really good at presenting himself as not an idiot. Okay. Other things that people said were flaws that weren't flaws. Oh, another thing was, like, people were saying, like, oh, all the parts where it shows Helen, like, sneaking around the island in Act 3, we would have seen her doing that. And one of the examples they give is, it's when Blanc is watching Dave Bautista watching Whiskey and Miles making out, and then, like, in an Act 1, or Act 2, rather, Act 1. It's in Act 1, we just see Blanc peeking behind the tree, and then he goes like this. Whereas in Act 2, we see Blanc and then Helen peeking out of the tree. But what people don't realize is, like, in Act 1, we just see Dave Bautista. We don't know Blanc is there. We hear a snap in the bushes. Dave turns. He turns back. Blanc looks out, and we know Blanc's there. Because in Act 3, it's revealed that, like, the time when Blanc and Helen are peeking behind the tree is before that, because then they're like this, Helen jumps into the bushes and makes the snap that makes Dave turn to see Blanc, and then when Blanc is peeking by himself, we don't see Helen. That's the second time. Like, that snap that we heard, the reason he turned was Helen jumping into the bushes. Like, it's just things like that where it's like, I get that most people haven't watched the movie 3 times, but if you just watch it twice or even once, like, you can put the stuff together. There's definitely stuff that you'll notice the second time that you wouldn't have noticed the first time. Which I'll get to when I talk about why people like it for the wrong reasons. But, like, I watched it really carefully, and I was like, no, this is, like, so carefully filmed and carefully constructed. Like, no, like, that's not a flaw. It's literally not a flaw. They literally explain, like, it's 2 different seeing Blanc peeking out behind the trees. Yeah. Just stuff like that. Just stuff like that where people are, like, there's the other thing that people basically, I feel like they hate Rian Johnson so much that they've just decided to hate this movie because he made it. And I'm like, invalid. Like, here's the thing. I said when I reviewed Knives Out, it's a miracle. Like, it's inconceivable to me that Rian Johnson is the guy who makes these movies because they're actually good. And again, unlike Last Jedi, which just tore apart something that people loved and left the ashes, this is like clearly like a loving tribute to, like, traditional mysteries, and it's so weird to me. I'm just like, and my aunt was like, I assumed there was, like, some eager intern who was like, Mr. Johnson, here's my mystery script, and he was like, and then, like, murdered the intern and just passed it off on himself, and I'm like, that's a valid theory. But yeah, so yeah, I'm like, I am no lover of Rian Johnson, far from it. But these movies are good. And I am not one of those people who's like, oh, this director or this actor is terrible, therefore I can't watch the movie. And I'm like, nah, they're my screen monkeys. Actors and directors, they perform for me, and I clap. I'm like, I don't care what they believe in their real lives. I don't care even what they're trying to present versus what actually gets presented. Which we'll come to, yes. So yeah, it just bothers me. I'm like, people have decided to hate this movie, and I don't know why. And again, a lot of it stems from the, like, not understanding the tropes of a murder mystery, where it's like, yes, it's very artificial. Yep, yeah, like, that's par for the course. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so that's people who hate it, who are wrong. And then there's people who love it, incorrectly. So, and some of them I don't, I'm so mean. Okay. Some of them have just very, like I said, banal takes of just like one person online was like tickled pink by the fact that Whiskey, like, I thought she would be a bimbo when she first showed up, but actually she's deeper. And it's like, yep. Yeah, like, okay, like, that's, yeah, like, it's fine if you're into that and you're, like, very surprised by that, but I'm like, that's just, like, a normal trope for, like, traditional mysteries, is you present somebody as one way and then they turn out to be different from what you thought. Like, okay. Or people who are like, oh my gosh, like, Miles Blanc, like, uses his southern charm to disarm people, and I'm like, yep, he literally says that he does. I was saying, I'm so mean. There was this article, this is tangentially related. Once upon a time, there was an article in some media magazine about how the lepers in Princess Mononoke, it's like they're confirmed to be lepers. And I'm like, the dialogue says they're lepers. Like, that's not a confirmation. That's literally what they are. Like, what? And this is that same kind of a, like, people being like, it's one thing to just enjoy, like, what's actually there. I'm like, yeah, no, it has a really fun mystery, and the characters are really funny, and friggin' Daniel Craig is adorable. But, like, to be tickled pink, and it's fine if you're tickled pink by it, it's fine, but it's another thing to be, like, the person about Whiskey was like, why is anyone talking about Whiskey? And it's like, because, like, she's not that interesting of a character. Like, yes, it's cool that, like, she was presented as a bimbo, but actually she's secretly less bimbo-esque. I mean, she's still a bimbo, but, like, she has her own reasons. But, like, it's not something that we need to talk more about or take a deep dive on because it's just so obvious. Like, yeah. And those people, again, I don't mind. I'm like, okay, you're very delighted by this. Like, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But then there's people who I want to punch in the face because they are, like, one-track minds, and I blame them somewhat for why conservatives hate this movie. So, let me give you an example. There are people on Tumblr who are like, oh my gosh, Blanc is gay! And that's all they talk about. Or, they'll be like, oh my gosh, Miles is like Elon Musk, eat the rich! And that's all they talk about. Or they'll be like, oh my gosh, Helen's black, and she, like, I don't know, takes, like, or Miles stole, like, stuff from a black woman, and there's a black woman, racial, and I'm like, and that's all they talk about, and I'm like, yes, that stuff is present-ish, like, in some capacity, but it's really not what the movie's actually about, and you guys laser focusing, and talking about literally nothing else, aka only talking about woke stuff, is why conservatives are like, oh, well, that's what the movie's about, so we can hate it. And I'm like, oh, which is wrong, but, like, you're both wrong. Of the reason, like, even if all that stuff is in that movie, that's not why it's good. It's good because it's such a well-constructed, tightly little constructed movie. Like, the writing is really snappy. The characters are really good. And again, over the top. This is getting back to people who didn't like it. They're like, oh, the characters are so, like, cartoonish. And I'm like, it's a comedy. It's a comedy mystery. You're allowed to be artificial. My brother was even saying, like, he thinks that if it was a cartoon, people wouldn't have a problem with the way the characters are. And I'm just like, well, that's just, like, American, like, again, certain other countries, Japan, doesn't have these problems where they realize, like, art is artificial and you're allowed to, like, ramp characters up, like, in certain genres. Whereas Americans are like, no, it has to be realistic no matter what, unless it's an actual cartoon. And I'm like, no, like, it's okay, especially in a country house, closed circle of suspects mystery, to have very, like, again, ramped up characters, like, who might not be completely realistic. They're very caricatured, but that's okay. Like, that's the genre that we're watching. Oh my gosh. Especially in a comedy. Okay. Yeah. Where was I? Oh, why people should like it. It's so well structured. Again, you have the first half of the movie that starts with a knock on the door, and then you have the second half of the movie that starts on a knock on the door, and it recontextualizes everything that you thought you saw. To the point where there's, like, red herrings that aren't even, like, clue red herrings to who did the murder, but they just get you thinking on something that isn't actually important. Like, after Andy, quote unquote, like, reams everybody out by the swimming pool and she's walking away, and that one politician lady's like, something's off, like, what's going on? Like, this isn't normal. And we see Andy, like, stumbling. And so that gets us thinking, like, what's going on? Is she dying of cancer? Like, what's happening? Blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out, like, no, she was just drunk. And, like, that's a red herring. And it's great. And, again, like, it uses that kind of, what should you be watching? Like, what should you be paying attention to? What's actually important? What isn't? It does it so well. It reminded me of an Agatha Christie story. Because that's what she does so well. Is she gives you all these little details. And you're like, I have to pay attention to all of them because they could all be important. But I'm not sure which ones are important. Like, so well done. Another thing is, like, thematics. The theme of the movie. I already talked about how Blanc is, like, you know, he gets tunnel vision and he doesn't realize things are stupid. Whereas you have Helen, who I argue Helen is, like, much more like Miles than anybody is talking about. Like, Andy, yes, Andy is, like, a self-made woman and she's very smart. Whereas Helen, like Miles, is, like, a destructive disruptor. Somebody was also saying that, like, oh, well, like, is disruption, like, they didn't like that Miles as a disruptor is, like, presented as evil, but Helen, when she destroys everything, is presented as good. And I'm like, disruption is morally neutral. Disruption literally is, like, a morally neutral act. Andy was a good disruptor. Sweetie Pants, like, creating really comfortable sweatpants during a pandemic is a good thing, unless they're made in a literal sweatshop. Like, okay. And so that's why Miles as a disruptor is, like, the reason, like, the clear is so bad is because he just doesn't care if it works or not. Like, he just doesn't care. He's too stupid to care. And Helen, from the beginning of the movie to the end, is, like, she's similar to Miles in the beginning, where she gets the puzzle box and she's just like, I'm gonna break it. Like, I don't care. Like, and it's set up, like, that's, like, foreshadowing. It's like, that's how she deals with things. She's just like, I don't know the proper way to do this, so I'm just gonna break it. Which, again, you're like, oh, is that, like, evil or good? It's like, it's neither. It's just a morally neutral act until the end of the movie, where in order to seek justice for her sister, she does the thing with Clear, and to prove that Clear is dangerous so it doesn't get used. Because that's what Andy was actually fighting for. Like, yes, Helen, like, more than anything, just wants justice for her sister who was murdered, but in order to get justice and to, like, basically finish the work Andy started, she has to bring down, like, Clear. And that's what her disruption did. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to destroy everything Miles wants. It's like, I'm going to destroy it in such a way that you cannot ignore the danger of Clear. It was so good. It was so good. I was like, yeah. It's funny, too, because the first time I saw it, that whole, like, Clear scene, I was like, it's okay. And the second time I was like, yeah, because you're thinking about Miles' disruption speech, and you're thinking about that scene where it's like, she starts by breaking little things that, like, people don't really care about, and then there's things that people want to broken anyway, and then she's like, I'm gonna break the system. Because the system is flawed and will get people killed. Yeah. But again, back to the people who, like, say stupid things and I want to, like, strangle them, is there was some person who was like, oh my gosh, like, Miles Blanc is great because he's a white man who knows to step aside and let, like, a black woman, like, take care of things. And I'm like, no, he's a detective who is at least partially a stand-in for the law, who cannot take matters into his own hands, so he lets a civilian do it. Which is a typical thing in traditional mysteries, except for Sherlock Holmes, who will totally take things into his own hands. But everyone else is like, no, we will let, like, I can't do this, like, Hercule Poirot can't do this necessarily, but, like, other people can. Heck, there's an episode of Columbo where, like, he, again, friggin', there's so many, like, random, like, traditional mysteries with, like, random Middle Eastern princes and stuff. There's an episode of Columbo where, like, he knows who did it, but he can't prove it. So he basically, like, gets his friend, this random, like, Middle Eastern prince, to be like, I'm gonna send the Secret Service after you. Ta-ting! And like, the guy's like, oh, I confess. Like, letting not even a civilian, but, you know, letting somebody who can seek justice take care of things when you're, like, semi a law and order type, like, that's a typical thing in mysteries. yeah, but people on Tumblr aren't acquainted with mysteries, so they're like, oh my gosh, this is like about race or something. Or even people who are like, oh my gosh, this is a movie about like a white man stealing an idea from a black woman. And I'm like, no, no, it's about a particular person who happens to be white stealing ideas from everybody. Like, he does it from everybody. And he didn't even steal the idea from Andy. He literally just wanted the company from her, so he was like, oh yeah, I stole the idea. Like, stealing the idea was a means to an end, which was just getting the company so he could keep doing Clear without her taking her half of it. Like, and again, cutting somebody out of a will or cutting somebody out of a company or cutting somebody out of something is like typical for a traditional mystery. Tons of rich white British people do that in tons of mysteries or Columbo stories or whatever you want. Like, it's not racial, and these dummies on Tumblr making it like racial or class or Marxist or whatever. I'm like, you're giving fodder to the other side who like wants to hate it because it's woke. And I'm like, okay, but like it might be woke. I'm sure that Ryan Johnson like intended some of that in there, but that's not what the movie is about. The movie is about a mystery and justice and like a dangerous person and a murderer being stopped from being dangerous and getting comeuppance for being a murderer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, it's not about white versus black. It's not about like class. I mean, it is a little bit about class, but not really. It's just about like justice, which is what mysteries are about. And so I'm just like, oh, why? It just makes me so annoyed. I hate when people like, again, explain things badly, or they're like, this is what it's about. And I'm like, that's not, no, it's not what it's about. It's just a good story. Okay, so that is why I'm really bothered by people who talk about Glass Onion. And yeah, so you should go see it. And if you've only seen it once, I recommend seeing it again because it's actually really, really great. It's really good. Not as good as Knives Out, but again, it's hard to beat like Knives Out because that's a pretty danged good movie. So, I will see you next time in this little alcove, and yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later. Bye!